As you guys know, I am super excited for the Steam Deck, and this is a Nintendo Switch. It's not actually a Steam Deck, but today we're gonna be doing something fun. You see, I think I can pretty closely predict how strong the Steam Deck GPU is going to be. And all we need is something that's in my PC right now.
All we're gonna need is my 5700 XT.
Now you may be wondering, well, how does a 5700 XT actually help? Well, you see, there's some math we can do to make this work out pretty well. In fact, actually, thanks to Valve's incredible transparency, we know exactly what's going into the Steam Deck. And because of that, well, we can just kind of figure out how much of a 5700 XT it would take to actually run a Steam Deck. And the answer is about 20% of a 6700 XT minus a small percentage, around 4%, for a decreased clock speed, because it actually runs at a lower clock speed per each CU inside the Steam Deck. Now that sounds really complicated, but if my math is correct, it should actually be very close to a 5700 XT at its normal configuration, because that's around 4 to 5% more or less efficient than a 6700 XT. So with that out of the way, all we have to do is get 20% of the 5700 XT's performance, and then we should be able to actually see what roughly the Steam Deck is capable of doing. But this is a bit of a flawed methodology for a couple of reasons, because there are things we can't test. For one, we are going to be using GDDR memory, and the Steam Deck does not have GDDR memory. In fact, it has only DDR5. Now, that will help instead of hinder the Steam Deck. Currently, most systems run DDR4 memory, and well, I don't think there is a single consumer system actually running DDR5. So we really can't test how that would affect an APU directly. Not to mention, all of AMD's current APUs run Vega graphics instead of RDNA graphics. Because of that, we're gonna actually build a bit of a margin into our test today. Our goal is anywhere between 20 to 30% utilization on the GPU. That's how we're going to make sure that we're not going to be peaking this thing out. And we're going to be testing everything at 720p, and we're aiming for only 60 frames per second. The reason that we're doing that is the maximum resolution and refresh rate of the Steam Deck's screen. So if we can hit that and stay around 20 to 30% utilization, we should be in a nice 60 to 50 FPS range on the system. We also really can't test the processor because, again, it's gonna be a weird SoC, and we're also dealing with Linux instead of normal Microsoft OSs, meaning there's gonna be less background tasks, and because, well, Valve has all of the time in the world to tweak their OS to make this thing as compatible as possible, we might even have better performance on these parts than we could ever imagine on a standard Windows system. This is how Nintendo is capable of still using a Tegra processor in the Switch and producing quite impressive graphics with it. They've built an OS that is so light and tweaked everything so that it's so compatible that honestly, it's hard to look at something like the Switch and say that that's not at least impressive. So, assuming that Valve does the same thing with the Steam Deck, we should have a margin of error of at least 10% GPU utilization, which should at least allow us to perform pretty well. So let's go ahead and go over to the PC and let's see what settings we can run some games at.
So the first game we're going to test is Doom Eternal. We were able to actually get this game running on Ultra Nightmare at 720p. It ran above 60 frames per second without us capping it, so we capped it down to 60 frames per second using Radeon Chill. As you can see from the footage though, it's running buttery smooth, and our utilization peaked at a max of 22%, meaning that we are within our margin for success. Being said, Doom Eternal is kind of easy to run and can run on a toaster just fine, so I wasn't too worried about this game. Up next, I have a game that I would consider probably the best use case for this kind of advice. It's a bit old. We're running Batman Arkham Knight at 720p with everything else cranked to max and a frame rate cap of 60 frames per second. Again, this game actually capped out pretty low on our utilization. It actually only came to around 14%, meaning this game will probably run perfectly fine on the Steam Deck. And if you've got the rest of these games, this is the first time you're going to be able to play these games on a portable console, which is actually kind of awesome because these are still some of the best superhero games in existence. Now to test something a bit harder to actually run. We ran Borderlands 3 on 720p with a frame rate cap of 60 frames per second using the Radeon software, and we had to lower this one all the way to medium in order to actually get it to run well. And even that might be pushing it because we did kind of go a little close to that 30% utilization target that I built in as a bit of a margin. If you were playing this game on medium settings at 720p, you're probably going to have anywhere between 60 and 50 frames per second, but it does run and it would be a fun experience to take on the go. Now for a bit of a Switch comparison. Witcher 3 is actually on the Nintendo Switch, but it runs pretty poorly. So as long as we can get a visual comparison that looks better than the Switch, it definitely would be interesting. We were able to run Witcher 3 at 60 frames per second, 720p with around 20% utilization on medium. We did have to disable a lot inside the settings. Some hidden features such as Hairworks were on, and then we were able to actually get it to work properly. But I mean, look at it, it looks pretty good. And then finally, I wanted to test Jedi Fallen Order. The reason I wanted to test this one was Valve actually used this one in the promotional images for the Steam Deck, and I really didn't believe that it would run very well on it. And I am kind of right. Even after capping it and taking it all the way down to 720p and taking the settings down to low, we are struggling to stay within that 20% margin. At times we're peaking all the way up to 32% utilization. Now this might mean that we're gonna get anywhere between 60 and 50 frames per second, which would be okay, but Valve came out and said that they are only targeting 30 frames per second, which kind of makes sense. That being said, this game honestly is being done dirty if you're playing it at 30 frames per second instead of 60 or more.
All right, so what did you guys think about that? Honestly, I'm actually a bit more excited about this thing. Now, you might be bummed about the 720p thing or the 60 FPS, but let's actually do a little bit of an experiment. I got my Switch here. So let me go ahead and I'm gonna do some movie magic, and we're gonna put some of that gameplay footage on the Switch. If you were looking at this thing, I honestly think that you could lower the settings even more and still have a good time. That being said, there is one elephant in the room to all of this, and that is, well, docking. The Switch can dock. It upscales up to 1080p, and honestly, the 1080p performance of this thing might be a little bit more difficult to actually operate on. That being said, we do know that Valve said that they are targeting 30 frames per second for 1080p, which is a little disappointing because 30 frames per second is, well, it's a little low. And particularly if you're docking this into a gaming monitor, you're gonna be wanting to aim for like 120 frames per second. That being said, when it comes down to it, what this thing really is and how Valve is marketing it and why it's so successful already is because of what the promise of it is. The goal is to bring the PC with you. It's to be a portable PC and play your PC games. And on that promise, I think they're nailing it. Like, they're not marketing this thing as a Switch. They're marketing this thing as your PC, but portable. And as we've shown in the past on this channel, using something like Steam Link, you can just as easily in the same household get, well, your normal PC games on the TV. But I do wonder if Steam Link is going to have some special functionality when it comes to the Steam Deck. It should, and honestly, like, it would be a missed opportunity if Valve doesn't take that. But what do you guys think? Leave it down in the comments below. If you are super excited about this after seeing this video, honestly, like, I am super excited for this thing, and I cannot wait for it to come out. But that's just my opinion. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave it a like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Wolfie, out.